The Ocho, Chris Jericho, has signed a new 3-year contract extension with AEW with some new responsibilities. We're going to get into Jericho's comments, Tony Khan's comments, and what it means going forward for AEW. Plus, speaking of Ring of Honor, could a television deal finally be on the horizon? If Tony Khan is to be believed, there could be one close. Dalton Carr will be challenging for the Ring of Honor World Championship tonight, but we've got an update on his health after setbacks in recent years. Plus, Jon Moxley comments on his 30-minute vacation at All Out earlier this year. Plus, we've got the ratings for this week's episode of AEW Rampage. Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestling News 365. Hope everyone is doing very well. As always, there are plenty of news stories to get into in the world of All Elite Wrestling, especially considering tonight is a very special Tuesday night edition of Dynamite. Tuesday Night Dynamite will be live on TBS, and we've got some very, very big AEW news before tonight's show. So let's get straight into the biggest story, which is Chris Jericho sticking around in All Elite Wrestling for 3 more years. He was there on day 1 of the formation of the company. He is going to be in AEW for at least the next 3 years. Now, of course, this isn't the first person to recently have a contract extended with AEW because, of course, AEW World Champion Jon Moxley recently signed a 5-year contract extension with the company that would keep him contracted to All Elite Wrestling until 2027. Now, Moxley's new contract included additional responsibilities behind the scenes in the company, including a coaching role for younger talent on the roster. However, Moxley isn't the only former AEW World Champion locked down, as Variety has today exclusively revealed that former AEW World Champion and current ROH World Champion Chris Jericho has signed a 3-year extension with the company. Now, Variety confirmed that in addition to his in-ring roles, Jericho will take on increased responsibilities behind the scenes in AEW, where he will now serve as a producer and creative advisor while he continues to work as a mentor to younger talent. In a statement about the extension, Tony Khan said, quote, Chris Jericho long cemented his legacy as one of the greatest professional wrestlers of all time, and we're fortunate to have his skills, charisma, knowledge, and insights in AEW for years to come. Chris has discovered the fountain of youth this year, and he's having some of the very best matches of his legendary career against some of the top names in wrestling. In expanding his responsibilities, he'll continue to serve as a valuable leader with our roster, having the opportunity to utilize one of the most creative minds in the history of wrestling. Now, Jericho, we have comments from him too. When Jericho was asked why he opted to stay in AEW, he said, quote, I guess the simple answer is, why not? Things have been going so well in the company, and I really do feel that this is my company. It's tattooed on my heart, so to speak. I've been here since day 1, and there's really no reason not to be here continuing forward. When AEW first started, I think it was Chris Jericho and a group of very, very talented people that might not have been as well known, he continued. Within 3 months, that changed, and now within 3 years, we've got at least a dozen, maybe 2 dozen of our own homegrown stars that came into their own on AEW television. Of course, Jericho is set to defend his Ring of Honor World Championship against former ROH World Champion Dalton Carr on tonight's edition of Dynamite on TBS. And it's quite surprising, certainly, that this one, I don't think many people saw this coming. It's around that period of time, though. Jericho signed with the company in 2019, 3-year deal. So his deal would have been coming up, or certainly, I guess, would have been coming up this year, certainly. And it's 3 years is a long time for Chris Jericho. Chris Jericho is, 51? So we're looking at a situation where Chris Jericho is going to be wrestling into his nearly mid-50s. And you would argue, is this the final contract of Chris Jericho's career? Most likely. I mean, there's always a chance that at the end of his contract, he could go back to WWE for one final match. But from what he's really said, he really has no interest. He feels like there's everything that to be done has been done in WWE. You could argue that maybe his mind might have changed on that with Vince McMahon's departure from the company, but he always had a really good relationship with Vince McMahon, and he does have a good relationship with Triple H. He says they're very close friends, but I think at this point, what we're starting to see now, this pattern we're starting to see with AEW and Tony Khan, not only is Tony Khan retaining his some of his best known talents, some of his most profitable talents, some of his most reliable talent. And what we're seeing here is we have heard recently about names that have stepped up amid the chaos that's been going on in AEW. And yes, their contracts have been expiring, Chris Jericho, Jon Moxley, but we had heard rumors and reports that within the chaos of the CM Punk, Kenny Omega, Young Bucks situation, what we had been seeing is we'd been seeing Chris Jericho really step up, and we'd seen Jon Moxley also really step up. We'd seen Bryan Danielson really step up, and I think that in reality, what we're seeing now is those being rewarded for it. I think we're seeing Jericho, I think we're seeing Moxley get these new deals. Again, their contracts were expiring, but they've also got this increased responsibilities. And it's almost like maybe the Young Bucks, maybe Kenny Omega are somewhat being replaced by people that Khan believes he can trust and people he believes are valuable. You look at Jon Moxley, it's arguable that no one's had a better year in AEW, or no one's been more reliable, or no one's stepped up more this year than Jon Moxley. You could put Chris Jericho in that category as well. Whether you like Jericho or not, whether you are in favor of this Jericho Appreciation Society stuff, Chris Jericho, since he came back in January, has been completely reformed. He's been completely reimagined, reborn. He's in tremendous shape. He's been having fantastic matches. I'm not too wild on the whole Jericho Appreciation Society thing. I'm not sure he really needs a stable. But the matches he's been having are sensational. And I think also it's a really positive sign for the future of Ring of Honor. I think that Jericho is somewhat accurate in what he says, whereby it was such a smart move. Certainly in retrospect, it was such a smart move for Chris Jericho to be the first ever AEW World Champion. Why? Because he was a name that television executives that maybe weren't so familiar with pro wrestling, they knew who Chris Jericho was. And for Tony Khan to go to TNT and go to Warner Media and say, Chris Jericho is my world champion, it certainly gave people that weren't totally familiar with pro wrestling in AEW, they were like, wow, Chris Jericho's world champion, that's a marketable, that's a bankable name. People that were casual pro wrestling fans would say, what's this new company, this new competitor that's competing with WWE? Who's their champion? They go, Chris Jericho. They go, I know Chris Jericho. Okay, I'll tune in and watch that. And I think what this also actually really signifies is Tony Khan hoping to do the same thing with Ring of Honor. I said it at the time. The moment Chris Jericho, even before Chris Jericho won the ROH World Championship, I said it would be smart for Tony Khan to put the ROH World Championship on Chris Jericho and go to Warner Media and say, you know what happened with AEW, where I had the world champion be Chris Jericho and we launched the program, Dynamite, and it has succeeded since then. Let's do the same thing with Ring of Honor. Let's relaunch Ring of Honor, a weekly television program on whatever network, TNT, TBS, whatever you want to have it on, True TV, HBO Max. Let's have Chris Jericho be the world champion, and we'll see the same success that we saw with Dynamite. At least that would be the game plan. And I think that's what we're seeing here. And I would suspect as the contract goes on that Chris Jericho transitions more and more into this producer role, into this creative advisor role, into this mentor-like figure. And again, we've heard a lot of praise recently for Chris Jericho's behavior and leadership backstage within AEW. We heard at the night of the Brawl that Chris Jericho stepped up and kept everyone abreast of what was going on and has been a leader in the locker room. And why wouldn't he be? He's been around for probably the longest out of anyone that's active on the AEW roster right now, and he has got the most experience. So it's a smart move. It's a smart move by Tony Khan and by AEW. I know that some people are critical of Jericho's AEW run. I know that some people say he holds young talent down, or who's benefited from working with Chris Jericho. Chris Jericho in 2022 is still a name. The ratings back that up. The merchandise backs that up. He still is somewhat... No, he is. He's still a big star for AEW. And if Jericho went back to WWE, I think at this point, it could give off the impression that the AEW experiment is over, you know? Jericho, if he goes back to WWE, he's treated like a big star. And there's only a handful of talents really in AEW right now that I would say that if they made the jump to WWE now, they'd be treated like a really, really big star. Jericho, Moxley, Danielson. There's not a ton. And I know you said, well, I only just name an ex-WWE guys. MJF, obviously. But those kind of names, you know, they would be treated like big stars. And obviously, look, you've got several big names on the sidelines right now of AEW. So it's one of their biggest stars. It's one of their biggest merch and ratings movers. So it makes total sense for AEW to retain Jericho 3 years. Again, it'll be interesting to see where Jericho's career is at come the end of his contract, but we'll have to wait and see. But I think it's a smart move by AEW and by Tony Khan. Now, speaking of Jericho, of course, he's the Ring of Honor World Champion. We got an update on Ring of Honor television, and it is good news if you're a fan of ROH. When Tony Khan purchased Ring of Honor earlier this year, fans were excited about what the future of the promotion would hold under the management of the AEW president, CEO, and owner of the company. Now, since Khan's purchase of the promotion, ROH has hosted 2 pay-per-views, the Supercard of Honor over WrestleMania 38 weekend on April 1st, and Death Before Dishonor in July. The ROH World Championship recently changed hands at AEW Dynamite Grand Slam, with Chris Jericho dethroning Claudio Castagnoli to become the Ocho. Now, the move was questioned by a lot of fans who were hoping to see Castagnoli get a long run with the championship, with fans speculating that Jericho was given the title as a way to get eyeballs on ROH, just as AEW themselves did when Jericho became the inaugural AEW World Champion. As I just mentioned, today it was announced that Jericho had signed a new 3-year contract extension with AEW, keeping him with the company until 2025. Along with his in-ring roles continuing, Jericho will also be taking part in more roles behind the scenes. And speaking to Sports Illustrated about Jericho and ROH, Tony Khan teased that he will have, quote, great news soon regarding weekly ROH shows. He said, quote, we'll have great news soon about Ring of Honor weekly shows. The success of Death Before Dishonor on pay-per-view has ensured there will be more Ring of Honor pay-per-views. Our goal is to have one more great pay-per-view for Ring of Honor in 2022. Then we'll follow that up with a weekly show in 2023. Now, Jericho, of course, as I mentioned, is set to defend his title tonight against Dalton Carr on Dynamite, but that's the key quote right there. That's really what we've wanted to hear, or certainly if you're a fan of ROH or if you're a fan of AEW and you wanted to know an update on ROH's future when it comes to a weekly television series, that's what we've wanted to hear. We've pretty much got an outline of where Ring of Honor is going under Tony Khan right there. He said that they're going to have one more pay-per-view for Ring of Honor in 2022. Logically, that would be Final Battle, most likely in December, I would probably think. And he's basically saying we're going to have a weekly show at some point in 2023. Again, is that going to be announced this year? Logically, it would make a lot of sense to have Final Battle in December, and then during that pay-per-view, make the announcement. Ring of Honor weekly television series begins January 2023, or begins February 2023, or begins summer 2023, whatever it may be. That would, I would believe, would be the time and place. And it would appear that Tony Khan feels relatively confident now that, one, the TV show is going to happen. And he's been quite non-committal on the past. He's always said, we're trying to work with Warner Media Discovery. We're trying to figure it out. We're trying to see the best way to approach it. Death Before Dishonor was our first real show, and that was kind of a pilot to Warner Bros. Discovery of what we can do with the brand. Obviously, they're featuring it a lot more on television, which is no coincidence at this point. Clearly, AEW are trying to make people more aware of the ROH brand, and certainly Warner Media Discovery more aware of the Ring of Honor brand. And I have no doubts as well that Tony Khan, every time there's an ROH-centric match, whether it's a title match, whether it's got any kind of involvement with the brand, is taking that back to Warner Media Discovery and saying, look, see, these are the ratings for these matches and these segments. ROH can draw, so there you go. It's another company. We can launch this. We can do this. We can relaunch this brand. We can have a TV deal with this brand, blah, blah, blah. So he clearly feels confident that that show will get produced next year, whether or not it's with Warner Bros. Discovery. But I would think for Tony Khan in a big publication like Sports Illustrated to say, we're going to have a weekly television series in 2023. That implies he's very confident that the deal can be done. If not, it's probably already been agreed. There's lots more projects at the moment coming with AEW and Warner Bros. Discovery. We heard just yesterday they're going to be filming a documentary over the course of the next 6 weeks or so. We've also heard the chief, I believe, content officer of Warner Bros. Discovery come out and say they're really, really, really happy with AEW because they produce ratings, and actually, in comparison to some other television series, they actually don't cost, wrestling doesn't cost that much in comparison to a scripted television series, because if that scripted TV series gets big, that can cost a lot of money. Just look at The Big Bang Theory or something like that. So I think that they're very happy with AEW. I think AEW, again, they're going to renew that television deal and they're going to get more money because they're going to be producing more content. And part of that package, I believe, will be an ROH weekly television series. Then Tony Khan can do what he needs to do and start separating that roster out, start putting people specifically and exclusively on Ring of Honor, and then have more people that are only on AEW. Then you can spread things out. You can give people more TV time, and maybe, just maybe, that can then resolve some of the issues that people are having with their lack of TV time when it comes to their roster. Speaking of ROH, we've got an update on Dalton Carr. So as I mentioned, he's scheduled to face the Ocho, Chris Jericho, on tonight's Dynamite for the Ring of Honor World Championship. Now, the former champion appeared on Busted Open Radio to promote the match, and he also gave fans an update on his health status because he has had some tough injuries over the course of the last 5 or 6 years or so. He said, quote, "I broke my back in 2016 and I ignored it because I love pro wrestling. I pretended I just pulled a muscle and I laid on the ground for a couple of weeks until I could fake it for a while. And then I found ways around it in the ring because I was motivated. The Ring of Honor World title was still in my sights, so I just kept going and finding ways to ignore my injuries." Castle would go on to win that championship with a broken back, leaving him in an even worse condition. After 6 months of struggling through the injury, Castle found he could no longer walk normally and thought he might have to retire from in-ring competition. Thankfully, after putting in a great deal of rehab, Castle is now fully recovered and feels better than ever. He said, quote, "Now I would say I'm 300% better than I was 3 years ago." Though he currently holds the Ring of Honor World 6-Man Tag Team Championship with the boys, the Castle has not signed to an AEW or ROH contract as of a few weeks ago. Perhaps his performance tonight, though, could earn him a full-time contract from AEW and Ring of Honor owner Tony Khan, as has been the case for several wrestlers in the past. But yeah, Dalton Castle at one point was red hot for Ring of Honor, certainly. During a period of time that Ring of Honor was fairly hot as well, actually, 2016. And as he mentioned, those injuries just brutalized him. He was wrestling in almost like a back brace. It was bad. And what ultimately it did is it stifled his career because, as he mentioned, 2019, he had to take time away and he thought he had to retire. And he did that for the love of pro wrestling, and it's unfortunate. It was really unfortunate. So I'm really glad to see him get his opportunity tonight. I hope he has a great showing, because if he does, he's going to be part of AEW and Ring of Honor going forward, certainly. Jon Moxley was meant to be on vacation. This is the funny thing with Moxley, isn't it? After last month's AEW All Out pay-per-view, the company was dominating the headlines for all the wrong reasons. After a brutal, intense match between Moxley and CM Punk for the AEW World Championship, an alleged backstage brawl involving Punk, Ace Steel, the Elites Omega, and the Young Bucks broke out in the locker room area, leading to several suspensions. Following that night, Moxley was once again the man to pick up the ball and run with it, becoming an AEW World Champion for the third time and taking the helm as the company's ace. However, as I mentioned, he was meant to be on vacation. He said, quote, "I was going to be gone and off TV for 6 weeks, Moxley told Sports Illustrated in a new interview. It wasn't that I needed a vacation. I was feeling good and feeling hot, but it had to be done with what we were going to do for a story. Going into All Out, I was thinking, after I get through this match, that's it for a while. I wrestled the match and we kicked each other's ass. I went outside to smoke a cigarette with Eddie Kingston in celebration. That vacation lasted around 30 minutes. By the time I went to bed that night, I was pretty sure we were going to pretend the vacation was never going to happen. But it's all good. You just roll with the punches." And certainly he has, and he's been rewarded with that 5-year contract extension, and he's the AEW World Champion, so not bad for a guy that was meant to be on vacation right now. Finally, we got the ratings for Rampage this past Friday, and Rampage was watched by 458,000 average viewers, which is a significant boost, a 13% boost from the Friday before. The show did even better in the key demographic with a 0.17 rating, which is a 28% increase from the week before. Now, playoff baseball was dominating television for SmackDown for television on Friday. Rampage ranked at number 20 for broadcast primetime, but did rank number 9 in cable originals. Again, you know, considering the boost Rampage received, the numbers are still drastically down from last year. The October 15, 2021 episode was watched by 578,000 average viewers, which is 21% more than this past Friday. So again, you know, they're better than the week prior, but that's Rampage's audience at this point, between 400,000-500,000. That's it. And that's not to say that there isn't an audience available at that time. You can talk about time slot and being pre-taped, that's true. But there was an audience there last year, well, about sort of September, August time of last year when the show debuted, there was an audience there to watch the show. But, you know, they've basically been conditioned over the course of the last year or so to not really care about the show, and it reflects in the ratings. And that's not going to change until AEW gives the fans a reason to care once again about this show. And by care, I mean put it on a Saturday, put it at 8 to 10, make it live. Not a lot's really going to change when it comes to the ratings of Rampage, unfortunately. But there you go, guys. That's the latest AEW news for you. Be sure to smash a like on the like button. Be sure to subscribe, bottom right-hand corner. Let me know your thoughts on today's AEW news stories in the comment section below, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right-hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.